If you haven't played Unpacking and you've clicked on this video, maybe because you want to know what the game is like and whether it's worth checking out, I'm begging you to play it before watching any further. I'm going all in on talking about every aspect of the game. Well, probably not every aspect, but most of the important ones. Like, I'm not going to be holding back. Unpacking is an emotional roller coaster, particularly if you set aside an afternoon to play through the whole thing in one go. And if you're wondering how a game about putting spoons in a drawer or trying to find wardrobe space for all your pants can even be an emotional roller coaster, well, again, I would urge you to play the game before watching much further. I mean, the entire premise of this video, is basically...
A piece of art caused me to have an emotional reaction.
And I would hate for my little YouTube video to rob you of a similar experience. And you can tell I feel strongly about this because I've opened the video with this warning instead of my customary bad joke. Seriously though, this game is very moving. Unpacking. It's not often that a game title is so literal, at least not in modern day. You spend 8 levels moving your protagonist into different homes of varying different sizes and complexities. I was about to call her an unnamed protagonist, but you literally get to name her as the first thing you do in the game. You unpack boxes, putting the items you pick out wherever you think they should go. And aside from a few item placements that are of narrative importance, stick a giant pin in that, you're given free reign over what you put where. Within reason. I mean, maybe in real life you could keep the toaster on the toilet seat in case of emergencies, and hey, you do you, no judgment here. I'm sure we've all been struck by a sudden craving for toast while we're washing our hair, but in Unpacking, the toaster goes in the kitchen. But by and large, you're able to stamp a little bit of your own personality on the protagonist. What you, and by extension she, chooses to have displayed and what you choose to put away in a drawer, or in a cupboard, or under the bed. On its surface, Unpacking is a zen puzzle game about putting things in their right place. Peaceful music hums in the background, the pixel art is vibrant and detailed enough that you can mostly figure out what each item is, allowing you to figure out roughly where it goes. Though shout out to everyone who got confused by what a GameCube is around the time the game came out. You start out in a childhood bedroom in 1997 and end in a... well, now we'd be getting ahead of ourselves. You begin the game by moving into your childhood bedroom. Finally, my own room reads the caption underneath a picture in the photo album after you complete the level and move on to the next. It's an uncomplicated introduction to the game's mechanics and design. Being a kid, you don't have an overabundance of stuff and there's plenty of room for everything. There's even enough room for you to get creative with where you put things. You start zipping through the protagonist's life, from the childhood bedroom of 1997 to living alone in a college dorm in 2004, to living with housemates in 2007. The second level of the game sees the protagonist with more stuff to fit into a slightly more restricted space, where the third level first introduces its players to a living space occupied by other people, forcing you to move your possessions around already existing items. And it's here that you might catch yourself thinking you've figured out the progression curve of the game. In 1997, 2004, and 2007, Unpacking follows a fairly standard puzzle game formula. An introductory level to get you used to how the game works and what it expects from you, a follow-up level that offers the same basic challenge, and I use the word challenge very lightly here. This is a game that is designed from the ground up to be a stress-free experience for the most part. And then a third level that adds some kind of complexity to the mechanics that you're by now already familiar with. And in fact, the majority of the game's fourth level, set in 2010, seems to follow this same trajectory. But we'll get to that level shortly. For now, I want to keep the focus on the first 3 levels, because even though they seem fairly typical for a puzzle game, As much as Unpacking is a fairly atypical puzzle game just from its premise alone, there's actually a lot of subtle and impressive things that the game does that become more obvious in later levels, but you can catch just from playing the first three, especially if you're like me and you've accidentally trained yourself to pay way more attention to everything that's happening in a video game than is probably normal. For starters, and I want to call this out right now because it's incredible, I want to highlight the mind-blowing attention to detail in Unpacking. Yeah, that's right. I'm taking a tangent inside a tangent, and now I'm going to spend the next few paragraphs talking about a cup. Sound design is something that is often overlooked in a lot of video games. I find that most people, sometimes even myself included, only really notice sound design when it's bad or counter-immersive. Is that a thing? Counter-immersive? I think I just made up a term to describe a video game. I don't think that's a thing. It's like counterintuitive, I guess, but for immersion. Anyway, listen. Listen to this. This is an incredible level of detail. Each object in the game will make a different sound depending on what the object is made out of and what you're placing the object down on. Even more incredible, like things such as different types of wood will play slightly different sounds. This is something that some players might not even notice, or may only notice subconsciously, being only sort of aware that it's a thing without really noticing specifically that it's happening. It's such a great little touch, and I say little knowing full well that this was probably a huge undertaking to actually implement in the game, but it adds so much to the game. One of the reasons I like to talk about smaller details of video games in these videos, like fonts in Control, or the sound of a cup in Unpacking, is because they oftentimes have quite a large impact that doesn't necessarily register unless you're specifically looking out for it or paying very particular attention to it. It's just a cup, being placed on a table or a countertop or a tile or a toilet seat, but it creates a fascinating and fantastic sense of immersion in the world of the game, whether you're conscious of it actually happening or not. Your ears hear it, your brain translates it, and you think, yep, that is most definitely the sound of a cup being put in a bathtub. It's not just about cups though. Naturally, this extends to every object and surface in the game, from the items you unpack even to the sound of doors colliding with things if you try to open them when there's something in the way, for example. If you shake one of the board games in the childhood bedroom, you'll hear the pieces rattling around. It's the same with pill balls. And you can interact with a lot of different items, more than you probably think you can. You can solve a Rubik's Cube, you can blast some tunes through your boombox. Program a microwave, turn on a video game console, pose a wooden drawing mannequin. You can even get some stickers from the game for performing hidden actions, like flushing every toilet in every level. Nice. This level of immersive detail doesn't stop at shaking a box of operation, banging a cup off every surface in an apartment like a toddler who wants their dinner. There's a ton of small, easy to miss details in the game. And I think it's a crime that those details are easy to miss, so I'm going to point more of them out. Like the very subtle passage of time. As you play through a level, you may or may not notice that things change outside the various windows in the game to signify the passage of time. In the fourth level, for example, you can see cars driving across a bridge. The later in the evening it gets, the fewer cars you'll see. Brilliantly, the passage of time isn't tied to how long in real time you've been playing the level for, but to how much progress you've made in each level. The more you've unpacked, the later in the day it gets. There's also some very subtle parallax scrolling, which you can see if you move the camera and look out a window, giving the game a slightly better sense of immersion by making it feel like you're not just staring at a 2D static level, but a proper 3D space. Although I can't take credit for noticing that last one myself, I only learned about it while watching the developers talk about making the game in a fantastic no-clip studio video which is linked in the description, and you should absolutely go and watch if you enjoy watching in-depth videos about games, which I have to assume you do if you're watching this one. All the while, as you unpack all of the protagonist's possessions, and maybe mess around with them if you're like me and totally obsessed with all of the intricacies and small details built into the game, you're learning. One of Unpacking's greatest strengths is how much it shows rather than tells. The game has about 8 lines of dialogue, and that's not really dialogue, rather the captions that appear in the photo album at the end of each level alongside the picture of the place you just decorated. Like the one I mentioned earlier from the first level, finally, my own room. These captions add some flavour or context to the level you just played, but are absolutely not needed in any way for Unpacking to tell its story to players. In fact, it's quite remarkable how much Unpacking manages to do with sometimes the smallest details. It's not just the sound of a pan being put down on the carpet. The game tells an entire story and presents the protagonist as a well-rounded, fully fleshed out character that you're able to connect with using only the belongings you find inside moving boxes. In the childhood bedroom, you don't get any grand exposition to tell you the protagonist is Jewish. You simply rummage through a box and find a dreidel and put it somewhere in your room, and later you'll find a menorah and display it proudly. Unpacking things in Unpacking is an excellent vehicle for meaningful, character-driven storytelling, as it turns out. For starters, moving is generally something that occurs at some of the most pivotal moments of our lives. Generally, if you're moving from one home to another, there's a reason for it, and that reason can usually be a big one. Like most of the times I've moved house, it's usually because of a massive life event, like the first time I moved away for university, or a new job, or after a painful breakup. Unpacking takes these gigantic life changes and creates a narrative around them, using personal belongings and new homes as its storytelling tools. There's no doubt that this story could have been told in any medium, but the way Unpacking creates its narrative and emotionally connects its players to its protagonist is something that could have only been accomplished in a video game. Watching a movie where a character silently unpacks her stuff at 8 different periods of her life could definitely work, but you're not going to feel as emotionally connected to a little red bus or a pink stuffed pig unless you yourself have experienced these moves alongside the protagonist, at least not in my opinion. There's something magical about how Unpacking chooses to tell its story, how deeply you become invested in some otherwise outwardly mundane possessions. It's one thing for a little red bus, presumably acquired on a childhood trip to London, to have sentimental value to the protagonist. It's another thing entirely for the game to manage to create that same sentimental value in you, the player, as I realised it had during the final level of the game, and the footage that is playing now, where I unexpectedly pulled it out of a box and was momentarily emotional to see it again, even though it's literally followed the protagonist throughout her entire life. It turns out you can gain a lot of insight into a person through their belongings. Seeing them move a number of times for a number of different reasons gives players a fascinating glimpse into their lives, who they are, how they change, and what they value. Whether that's through the things that follow her through her life, a pink stuffed pig or a favourite cup that goes from being a drinking cup stored in a kitchen to a chipped and cracked cup used to hold a toothbrush in a bathroom, or by the things that get left behind, like a Tamagotchi or a work uniform from an old job or a football, right through to the new things that appear. A ukulele, an ever-expanding collection of amazing chicken figurines, or a walking cane. The things that we treasure and that hold significance to us, whether that's personal significance, sentimental significance, or practical significance, can give a unique insight into who we are and what we value. Looking around my room right now, I can see several things that jump out at me. A collection of stuffed toys on a shelf, both old and new, a prominently positioned pill organizer, an entire corner of a large desk dedicated to makeup and skincare products, and a large collection of Star Trek Starship models, a shelf stuffed with books and bras and face masks lying around everywhere. Even me just telling you about the most noticeable things in my room at this precise moment, without showing you them or going into any great detail about them, will give you some degree of insight into who I am and what I value. Heck, even just me telling you what I see as most noticeable will probably tell you something about me, and that I really need to tidy my underwear away more often. Jesus Christ, hang on, excuse me. And that's not only how this game functions, but how it creates such a deep connection, both to its protagonist and the story it's telling, through small details. The entire game, from the audio design to the game design to the narrative design, has been built around them. They're all important and they all deserve to be talked about breathlessly. This is how Unpacking lays the groundwork for some truly impactful storytelling. I found that there's a really good test you can perform to find out if someone has played past the halfway point of Unpacking if you find yourself in a conversation about the game. Simply ask them about the diploma. You don't need to offer any more context. If they know, they know. They'll meet your question with a passive indifference or an unknowing blank stare, or, if they've passed the middle level of the game, the rage and hurt will emanate from them as you force them to remember the game's most emotional gut punch. Level 4, 2010. Moving in with The Boyfriend. This, for me, is where Unpacking stops being an interesting experiment of telling the story of a person's life by unpacking their belongings and putting them away, and hits powerful emotional beats, telling a moving story, pun not intended this time, by continuing to stretch and explore its gameplay mechanics. Because there is no distinction between gameplay and story, as you might find in many other games where the two are siloed away from one another. The gameplay is the narrative, and the narrative is told through the gameplay. I've played plenty of games in my life that have poured vast resources into animation, motion capture, talented voice actors, and impeccable cutscenes, all to try and provoke emotional resonance. This is not me attacking cutscenes or voice acting or whatever. The direction, the animation, the design, and the voice acting in Horizon Forbidden West is top tier stuff, and this footage is just what I had lying around on my hard drive as I'm editing this. But it's an interesting point of comparison, and I feel worth noting that you don't need impeccable production values and millions of dollars to provoke an emotional reaction from players. Heck, if Sony had wanted to successfully toy with my emotions, it turns out they could have just had me find a stuffed pig in a box 8 times. It would have saved them some money, but there aren't all that many games that have provoked as powerful a reaction from me as what happens with the diploma. The entire mood of the 2010 level feels off almost from the get-go. The protagonist is moving into her boyfriend's apartment, her first time living with someone who isn't a house full of roommates anyway. But you'll probably immediately notice that the entire aesthetic feels wildly removed from everything that has come before. From the look and feel of the apartment itself, to the belongings that are already here. The electric guitar, the huge rack of weights, the Xbox 360. At first, it feels like the game is commenting on the compromise that comes with moving into someone else's space, which feels like a natural progression of Unpacking thus far from a narrative perspective. As you begin to unpack, it becomes clear that there is a definite clashing of styles between the protagonist and her boyfriend. It also gets pretty hard to actually find space for your cool stuff in amongst his lame stuff. This also feels like a natural progression of Unpacking thus far, upping the challenge of the puzzle gameplay, as you have to try and fit your stuff into a more limited space. These are pretty good assumptions. They're very inaccurate. As you continue to unpack, things become more annoying. His stuff is everywhere, and he very clearly hasn't bothered to make any room for you at all. So not only do you have to keep finding homes for all of your stuff, but you have to rearrange the things that are already in place to make room, except for things that are most important to him, I guess, like the posters in the living room or the electric guitar on the wall. And there's not even a space for the protagonist to work in. Previous homes have always included space for her ever-expanding art tools and supplies, a laptop, a drawing tablet, highlighters, crayons, and such. Here, you're relegated to the coffee table in the living room or the kitchen bench with those high stools with no backs and square seats that are super uncomfortable to sit in for longer than 5 minutes. But it's okay, the challenge is over. Maybe compromise will come later, once the protagonist has moved in, and her precious belongings will mix easier with her boyfriends as they continue to live together. And all you have to do at the end of the level is hang the diploma. Except, there's no wall space. There is some wall space. It's in the bathroom above the toilet, but if you try to hang your diploma there, it flashes red. This is not a place you're able to hang your diploma, and it's the only place available. Every other piece of wall space is taken up by an electric guitar or some rock posters or a giant piece of art in the kitchen. The only place you can put it is under the bed, out of the way, like it's completely unimportant. So, boyfriend, if that even is your real name, you're telling me that I can't move a single one of your stupid band posters to hang my diploma? Like, I'm sure each and every one of those posters holds some sentimental value to you, but surely we can move one of them so I can put up my university diploma. You know, the thing I worked really hard for several years to earn. Like, you're not even letting me hang it over the fucking toilet. Do you actually want me to live here, seeing as how you've made zero effort to make any room for me whatsoever in your apartment, which has zero personality, by the way, unless the personality you're shooting for was douchebag with a side of pretentiousness. Like, ooh, look at me, I'm so edgy and hip, I have an Xbox 360. Shh, it's okay, baby, it's okay. I didn't mean it. And who keeps wine glasses displayed on a shelf in the living room? Put them in a fucking cupboard because nobody is impressed by them. Just like they're not impressed by the huge weights you have displayed in pride of place in the fucking living room next to the TV. I hope they slide off the rack and smash that TV in half. And while we're on the subject of things that are tacky, let's talk about that shitty fucking wall art in your kitchen.
Apparently that's a trigger for me.
Yeah, apparently.
Like I said, emotional resonance. The boyfriend probably isn't even that bad of a guy. Well, he has different tastes and a different style to the protagonist. I'm sure there are plenty of non-douchebag types who have a bland minimalist apartment, an affinity for gigantic wall art and display weights in their living room, like I would display something I was actually proud of. And I'm not knocking people who would look at this apartment and thinks it looks cool. But there's a growing sense of frustration that builds the further into the level you play, which runs over and explodes when you eventually come to the realization that the only place for your diploma is under the bed. Like, it hits hard. The next level, in 2012, sees the protagonist unpacking herself into her childhood bedroom, the relationship seemingly falling apart. Who could have seen that coming? And if you were in any doubt as to whether this was a good breakup or not, you can get your answer by trying to put a photo of the protagonist and the now ex-boyfriend on the corkboard, where the protagonist jams a drawing pen through his face. Which is a moment of deep catharsis, not just for the protagonist, but for the player as well. And a nice little piece of symmetry. I had to spend an entire level trying to jam myself into his apartment, and now I get to jam a drawing pen through his face. On a photo. Close enough. It's just a shame I couldn't have jammed that electric guitar up his ass. It's a nice little moment of connection between player and character. It's around this point that it becomes apparent that Unpacking is not a puzzle game with an exponential difficulty curve that has some fascinating ideas about the insights we can get into the belongings of other people, told in a unique way using its gameplay mechanics. Unpacking is a deeply resonant narrative game told using a unique gameplay mechanic to create an emotional bond between not only the player and the protagonist, but between the player and the protagonist's belongings. Video games.
What a cat said.
Unpacking tells its story in a non-traditional way, not with dialogue or cutscenes, but with gameplay. You almost don't need the photo album entries that close out each chapter of the game, though they're really cute and I love them a lot. By the time you've unpacked and decorated, I guarantee you've already pieced together everything that's going on in the protagonist's life up until that moment. So the curve isn't one of difficulty, but one of narrative. The challenge of each level isn't dictated by how far into the game you've progressed or whether or not it's time to introduce a new mechanic for you to learn and master. It's a narrative curve, which being crafted each level around whatever story beat the narrative demanded next. Moving into your first bedroom in 1997 is easy, not because that's the first level of the game, but because the protagonist is a kid and they don't have a lot of stuff. By contrast, moving into the boyfriend's apartment in 2010 is challenging, not because it's a mid-game level that assumes you've mastered the quirks and mechanics of the game, but because that challenge is demanded by the narrative. Unpacking needs to create that tension to sell the connection between the player, the story, and the protagonist. From a purely gameplay puzzle-solving perspective, 2010 and 2012 are probably the most challenging levels you'll face in Unpacking. Even though there are 3 more levels after you cram yourself back into your childhood bedroom as an adult, this is very much the protagonist's low point. It actually would make no sense for the levels that follow this point to be more challenging from a puzzle-solving perspective. That would actually require a series of narrative contrivances that would obfuscate or confuse the emotion that the game wants you to feel. In 2010, whether the protagonist herself knows it or not, the player slowly gets the sense that this relationship is probably doomed. A sense that is hammered home by the final emotional act of being unable to display the protagonist's diploma anywhere but underneath the bed. 2012 creates an interesting conflict of emotion. There's no doubt that moving back into a childhood bedroom is a step backwards for the protagonist, but from the player's perspective, it also feels like a triumph. I doubt there are many people who were emotionally invested in Unpacking that weren't glad to see the protagonist had broken up with her boyfriend, even if the idea of moving back into that tiny childhood bedroom would probably not objectively be seen as a step forward. It's a step backwards, but a necessary one, and one that comes as a relief, and it perfectly sets up the rising triumph of the rest of the game. The next level begins in 2013. The protagonist is moving out of her parents' house, jealous, and into her own apartment for the first time. The level of challenge in the gameplay is scaled back, turning this level and all that follow into a celebration. It takes longer to unpack, given how much larger the space is than any that have come before it, especially now that it's all yours. There are no roommates or shitty boyfriends whose stuff you have to contend with. Familiar items make their inevitable appearance, the stuffed pig, now worn and patched, the souvenirs from travelling, now joined by a windmill, suggesting a trip to Holland, and the chicken figurines that continue to multiply. There's also an interesting juxtaposition to the previous two levels. The protagonist almost seemed to stall, given that she was moving into tighter, more confined spaces. She didn't really expand or explore anything new, aside from the ukulele that made an appearance in 2010. At least it didn't seem that way from the stuff she was unpacking in those levels. In fact, a lot of her stuff seemed pared back, owing to the fact that her living arrangements seemed to be shrinking, or she wasn't being afforded enough space for everything that made her, her. But in 2013, moving into her own apartment and with plenty of space to stretch herself, we get to see that she's been expanding on and exploring her interests. There's now a music book to go along with her ukulele, drawings of a pig and a duck of what appears to be her D&D party. She has her own dedicated space for working on her art now in the form of a home office, and her diploma can be hung proudly on the wall and not hidden away under a bed. Sometimes it takes a pause or a backward step in our lives for us to truly evaluate and learn about ourselves. When we're going all out trying to balance work, life, interests, hobbies, friends, and everything else life throws our way, it can be hard to take a moment to ask yourself, am I happy with the way things are? Is there anything I could change that would make my life better than it is right now? I think this resonates with me quite deeply because I had a moment like this quite recently. No, not the one you're thinking of, another one. The one a lot of us had. Or at least that's the impression I get from talking to people. I do, despite what some people might think. In 2020 and 2021, it almost felt as if life stopped for a lot of us. Not everyone, of course. There are plenty of people for who life became even more hectic and chaotic, and I salute those people. For me, the succession of lockdowns created a sense of life slowing down for the first time in a long time, maybe even since childhood. And it gave me a chance to reflect on my life and ask those questions I asked just a moment ago, and to really dwell on the answers and implications. I've changed a lot in the last year. I reconsidered my priorities, what I actually value, and how I want to spend my time. And the 2013 section of Unpacking feels like we're seeing the beginning steps of the protagonist following a similar journey of self-exploration, of finally hitting a checkpoint and seeing the results of asking the questions, who am I, what do I want, and wait, are those rainbow socks? So I had originally intended to gloss over Unpacking's 2013 level, then move on to talking about the next level, given that that is a fascinating mirror of an earlier moment of the game. But when I was outlining this video, I realized that there's a lot more importance to this 2013 level than I initially realized during my playthrough of it, which, incidentally, also ties into one of my own personal goals of creating video game analysis on YouTube, born from interrogating myself about what I really wanted out of talking endlessly about video games on the internet. Okay, I just need to pause my analysis of the game here for a second to truly appreciate how much I love the protagonist's vibe. Like, unpacking all of her stuff over the years and seeing what she's into, what she collects, and just, like, who she is as a person. Her whole vibe is immaculate. Like, I'm not sure whether she has goals and I want to be more like her, or I love her and want her to be my best friend, or both. Anyway, sorry, I just really needed to fit that small gushing tangent into the video somewhere. Continue with the game analysis, feature Amy. 2015 brings with it a new twist on the gameplay and the narrative. Again, they're so completely intertwined as to be inseparable. For the first time, you're not moving somewhere new. In fact, you're not even unpacking your own stuff. The protagonist is moving in with her girlfriend, met sometime in the past couple of years. As a level in a video game, 2015 feels like a mirror image of 2010 on every level. You spent the majority of the game up until this point unpacking and following along with the protagonist, learning all about her via her belongings. Now it's time to start learning about her latest partner. The opening of this level, as you unpack the first few boxes and start to quickly figure out what's going on, is a magical journey of discovery. You get a sense of who the protagonist's new romance is, her likes, dislikes, what she's into, etc. I'm not going to go into any great detail about what the girlfriend's belongings tell us about her, because I've beaten that point into the ground already analysing the protagonist and the ex-boyfriend, and I want to drive at a different point. Though I will say that I love the fact that the first thing you're likely to notice when you start the level is that there are now plants everywhere. Everywhere. I love a lot about 2015 and what it does, and how it inverts the rising sense of dread and anxiety of the 2010 level. Instead, every new item you unpack will just make you smile. Well, I mean, maybe not every item. A toothbrush is just a toothbrush, to be fair. Although it is really cute how you can put them in the same cup. Maybe it is every item. The protagonist and the girlfriend are definitely different people. You can tell that they have differing styles and diverging interests. The girlfriend, for example, is definitely a bigger movie lover than the protagonist. But these are two people who complement each other really well. A feeling that quickly becomes apparent and only gets stronger the further into the level you go. And there's no great struggle to fit her stuff into the apartment. It almost feels like the space was waiting for the girlfriend to move in. Which, I guess, technically it was. Level design. The apartment is a fantastic piece of level design. It's the same space as the previous level. In fact, it's notable for being the only time you're not transitioning to a new place between levels. But when you're unpacking the protagonist stuff in 2013, it never feels like there's too much room. Like you're only filling half the space. Quite how Witchbeam managed this, frankly, I will never know. I'm not a game designer, and I'm not privy to the sheer sorcery that is involved in making video games work. 2010 was a challenge, emotionally and mechanically. In 2015, the only challenge is not grinning like a goofball at how obviously perfect these two people seem to be. I mean, look at these walkie-talkies! There are two of them! There's one for each bedside table. And if you put the protagonist stuffed pig and the girlfriend stuffed tiger next to each other, you get a sticker and an achievement called Fuzzy Friends. Like, these ladies are such dorks, and I am 100% here for it now and forever. The pair pound pack the girlfriend stuff, they turn the apartment into a cozy space for them both to live in, and everything fits together really, really well. Things are finally perfect. The final level of Unpacking takes place in 2018. The couple are moving into their first house, making this the largest and most densely packed level of the game, but quite probably the easiest one too. I'm sure there are some puzzle game purists who were disappointed that Unpacking hits its difficulty spike in its mid-game and gets progressively easier in its last few levels, but from a narrative standpoint, the difficulty curve is pitch perfect. You can really see that everything is coming up Milhouse for the best couple in video gaming in 2021. The new house comes with a kid's room, suggesting a kid is either on the way or already here. The protagonist has seen some success in creating a children's book starring the pig and duck that we've seen her working on through her drawings throughout the various moves, and, most importantly, there's now an army of chicken figurines accompanying the happy couple to their final home, at least in the game. One of my favourite touches in this final level is how everything is mixed up. There aren't like hers and hers boxes. You aren't going to be unpacking two separate boxes in the bathroom, for example, one filled with the protagonist's bathroom stuff and one filled with the girlfriend stuff. It's all just stuff. All of the items you've grown emotionally and sentimentally attached to are here: the red bus, the stuffed pig, the D&D figurine, etc. Because you've been following this character, moving from place to place through most of her life up until this point, you can very clearly differentiate between her things, her girlfriend's things, and the things that they got together. There are a lot of themes running through Unpacking. I've explored a lot of them over the past however many minutes this video has been running. Not for future Amy, delete this parenthetical and say the number of minutes it's been in the video. Wait a minute. But one theme which unfolds slowly over the course of the entire game and only really becomes apparent in its concluding chapter is also probably the most obvious one in hindsight, considering this is a puzzle game about fitting someone's belongings into a living space. And that's fitting together. Unpacking gently brushes up against this theme in its third level, when you're moving the protagonist into shared accommodation with some roommates, then brings it into sharp, emotionally painful focus in its fourth level, but it really lands in 2018. Because this isn't just a game about figuring out how to fit your stuff into a space, but about how people fit together. In 2010, it became obvious over the course of the level that you were dealing with two people who did not fit together. And now, triumphantly in 2018, we're dealing with two people who fit together perfectly. Obviously, from a narrative point of view, we can still see the differences, because we've gotten to know these characters over the course of a video game. But from a purely gameplay perspective, they're functionally the same person. Their stuff both comes out of the same boxes, and it doesn't matter if you mix it together, for the most part. And if you needed anything to cement that final theme, it's the amazing song that plays over the closing credits, created by Jeff Van Dyke, and accompanied by the wonderful vocals of Ren Brea and the sound of me sobbing uncontrollably. Unpacking closes with an image of the protagonist playing the ukulele for a partner and their kid, which I guess makes this song double as the only time dialogue is used in the entire game.
The moving truck pulls up, there's a knock on the door. Now all your stuff is here, in boxes on the floor. You open up a box, there is so much to do. I open up my heart, this is now a home for two.
So I want to close this video by just taking some time to really appreciate what Unpacking managed to accomplish. I think it's fair to say that I had no idea what I was getting into when I downloaded this game. It was the puzzle game about moving house and putting cups in cupboards. I had no idea there was even a narrative here, much less probably the most emotionally impactful narrative I experienced in 2021. I think the surprise really helped. So, I hope you didn't watch this video if you haven't played the game. In a video game with no dialogue, no cutscenes, no characters even present on screen aside from one single image after the credits have rolled, Unpacking is a game that allowed me to form a deeper emotional bond with its protagonist by making me form a deep emotional bond with the most important things in her life. I get a silly grin on my face every time I found that stuffed pig, delighted that it had survived another move. I had a powerful emotional reaction to a video game where you move house a bunch of times. I got to know and form an attachment to a character I never saw and never heard speak. It took me on a journey, and it moved me to tears. Shit puns aside though, this game sent me on an emotional roller coaster, and I'm incredibly glad I played it and incredibly thankful that it exists. Unpacking belongs to a personal collection of games for me, a game whose design I'm in awe of, from a developer whose talent I have a deep respect of, and if we're being completely honest here, a little bit jealous of. It's a game that means the world to me. I loved putting away every spoon, every kettle, every toothbrush, every thing. And now that I've made this video, it's time to start a campaign to get Witchbeam to make and sell me one of those stuffed pig plushies so that my life will be complete.
I smile to myself. You cut the tape with my Stanley knife, and we unpack our life. We unpack our life. We unpack our life.
Oh my god, I nailed that ending so hard. It almost feels wrong to actually continue talking. That should have just been the close of the video. But here we are. Thank you very much. Yep, that's a good start. Thank you very much for watching this video. I'm back on the retrospective grind. I thought I was out, and then they pulled me back in. And by they, I mean me. I pulled me back in because, as it turns out, this kind of thing is my favorite kind of video to make, and I wanted to like come back 12 months after making a video about Dark Souls 3 to make a video about Unpacking. Like, I played this game in January, like on the day that myself and Moody recorded our Game of the Year 2021 podcast. In January, I sat down in the daytime to play Unpacking because I was like catching up on video games just in case they would make my list. And Unpacking was so close to being my Game of the Year, like outright in 2021. And I've been obsessed with it for it's August, right? Yeah, I've been obsessed with it for like 7 or 8 months. And like, I talked about it a bit on the podcast with Moody because, you know, it's what we do. It's a discussion podcast. But like, I had to get all of this out of my system. So I'm back. I'm gonna be doing more. I'm gonna be focusing a lot more on retrospective videos. Because this is where my passion really lies, I think. Like, I've done reviews for many years, like always keeping up to date with the latest games and always making sure I have some kind of video, blog post, opinion, tweet, anything out there about all of the new games I play. And I'm still going to play like a bunch of like new release games because I love doing that. But in terms of like analysis and critique, I want to make more of this kind of video. Like, it's fun to like write 1,000 words about Power Simulator or whatever game I'm playing in the moment, but writing like 7,000 words about a cool ass indie game that like gave me like powerful like feelings, and really diving deep into like why that happened and what happened and how it happened, like that's the shit right there. So I'm finishing up, like I'm recording this on August 8th. I don't know when you're listening to it or when this video is going to come out, but like I'm going to be moving on from this. Well, actually, I'm going to be moving on from this to play Kirby because I just got Kirby. But like in terms of like projects, in terms of like YouTube projects, I'm going to be moving straight on to whatever's next. I have a big list of games that I have a lot to say about. So I don't know what's next. I don't know where I'm going, but I know I'm gonna have fun along the way, and I hope you join me on this journey because I think it's gonna be a fun ride, with some of the things that I have planned, potentially to talk about. It's at this point, like in past retrospectives, where I would flash up the list. I'd been making like a running list of like ranking all of the games just for my own edification, but I don't want to do that anymore. Like, it just feels like I'm putting competing games against each other, and even though I felt it was arbitrary, like, I don't want to do it. It's a bit cringe. I would also thank people like for watching like cuts of this video and like giving me feedback that I would ignore. Sorry. I did mostly ignore most of the feedback that people gave me in like my control video and whatnot. If I've sent you any part of this video to watch and give me feedback, thank you for watching it and giving me feedback, but I'm recording this at the same time I'm recording the rest of the script, which I don't normally do. I normally record the outro once I've finished editing the video. So thank you to whoever you are who watched this video. You knew who you are, and I love you very much. I'm gonna get out of here because I want to play Kirby and I need to chill. And I think Joe Medforce is streaming right now, so I'm gonna go and hang out in his stream too. I will be back really soon. Like, we've got the weekly podcast that's still happening. We stream on Twitch every Thursday night and every Sunday night. Sunday night? No, we don't. That's a lie. It's every Thursday night and every Saturday night. Maybe I've been talking for too long. We'll be doing more of this. I'll be doing more of this kind of video. Keep an eye out for big video essays about cool video games. Thanks for watching. I love you very much. Stay hydrated and have a great day.